I never thought that after 3 years of marriage to Carl, my divorce would feel simultaneously like a funeral and a rebirth. Suddenly, I was 35 years old and knee-deep in his abandoned garment shirts and his cologne's aftertaste. Good riddance, I whispered as I stuffed another of his dumb silk, tied into a cardboard box as sunshine from Virginia Beach came in through the windows, capturing dancing dust motes above the heaps of his belongings. Our beach cottage felt corrected, both more roomy and empty. And as I put away each item, my phone chimed. Naturally. Cassidy, how is the exorcism going? It's almost finished, and his ghost is being sent. Wedging the phone between my ear and shoulder, I responded, packing. I had just discovered his secret whiskey store behind my. She said you earned it that night with Cassidy and our friend. So keep the painting supplies as your divorce trophy. Jenna took me to Shoreline, a beachside pub that we had been going to since our 20s. 3 margaritas in the truth. I can't believe I wasted 3 years on him, I muttered, my fingers spilling out like the salt around our cups. Carl told me that I was emotionally unavailable because I spent too much money. So I tightened my grip over my glass. His 60-hour work weeks were somehow different from the time on my gallery. Jenna, ever pragmatic, raised her glass too. I swear I said the tequila was making my tongue drop. Emotionally unavailable women who truly just know their own value. I am married to my gallery now, so I will never date men or women again. Madison Turner, is there anything you haven't told us? I felt my cheeks heat. Cassidy almost spat out her glass. Just meant everyone. But you did. Jenna winked and reached for the image. My divorce grief had turned into strong determination by the time we staggered out of the pub. Even though the Turner Gallery had been struggling while my marriage was failing, the grand reopening would be my revive my assertion to the art community of Virginia Beach that Madison Turner wasn't merely surviving, but flourishing. The next week was filled with paint swatches and lighting tweaks, and I dismissed Carl. The unimpressive social media manager had demanded that we hire me, so I took control and asked artists who owed me favors to convince 3 large skills to display their work at the reopening. I told Cassidy, this place is finally beginning to feel like mine again. A striking abstract that perfectly encapsulated my vision for the gallery's new approach was hung as the last piece. Madison remarked, bold, unapologetic, alive, it looks amazing, as she stood back to be admired. No, our job. Carl didn't comprehend your vision. I looked at the space. Walls were repainted in elegant charcoal, and each piece was highlighted by modern track lighting. I love how the simple furniture is set up to provide private viewing spaces. But I'm tired of having people dim my. The night before the reopening, I stood by myself in the gallery with a glass of champagne while the ocean raged continuously. Reminder of nature's tenacity. I had always found solace in the way it persisted despite human interference. I raised my glass to the empty room and muttered to no one. Drama to new beginnings. Tomorrow, these hallways will be. The idea of being surrounded by friends, artists, critics, and prospective buyers made me feel both excited and afraid. The future of the gallery and my own destiny relied on this evening. So I invited all the major figures in Virginia Beach's art scene. Being flawless as I switched off the lights and took one more glance behind me. I couldn't have imagined that among tomorrow's, the woman who would completely upend my world would be guests. And she showed up with a vengeance on opening night. Selected a black dress that accentuated my proportions without becoming overly formal and had just enough edge to state that my blonde hair cascaded below my shoulders and that I was no longer Carl's official gallery wife. I would also spend an additional. I spent 10 minutes polishing my battle armor eye makeup. Madison, according to Travis Miller, one of the wealthiest collectors of champagne flutes in Virginia Beach, the metamorphosis is astounding. The room feels totally transformed. I grinned as a wave of relief passed over me. That was the exact goal. The conversation filled the gallery, and the gentle jazz I had chosen was. A photographer from the local arts magazine took pictures of the artwork. Not just the free beverages. Everything was going great around the corner until I saw her. Who walked through the crowd with. I had seen her photo in art magazines. But her red hair, which contrasted with her deep blue clothing, had a clear meaning. Heather Adams, the infamously scathing critic who had the power to make or break galleries with a. After just one review, I snarled at Cassidy, who was working, and my stomach fell, as my nighttime unofficial helper, whoa, the dragon lady herself. Cassidy straightened her stance and asked me to interfere. But I told her that it was theft. I had to confront this head-on. So I stopped Heather before she could enter the main show and offered her a drink of wine. Miss Adams, my name is Madison Turner, and I'm so grateful that you could come tonight. With laser-like accuracy, those blue eyes found me. I appreciate your curation. I soon regretted my decision, which was either unexpectedly excellent or unexpectedly horrible. Directness, and to my amazement, a sudden, revitalizing smile curved her lips. In fact, Heather Adams followed me throughout the exhibit for the next half hour, asking questions that went directly to the main reason I had chosen each work. Her expertise was astounding, and her views were incisive. Most importantly, she paid close attention to both the artwork and my responses. She paused before the abstract I had hung with, saying that critics had already formed their opinions on this piece. Cassidy's words reveal a lot about your viewpoint. So I inquired honestly. Curious. It's bold yet vulnerable, and it makes me think of someone who has survived a lot. Her eyes greeted mine after a recent divorce. Yes, the question surprised me. Tell me about your modest art world, Ms. Turner. Madison. I instantly corrected her as she repeated the sound of my name. Something changed in her mouth. And I'm Heather. The professional facade cracked just then. I became slightly more conscious of her perfume, which had delicate undertones of amber and vanilla. The remainder of the evening flew by. I sold 3 significant pieces, including one to Travis, and received a ton of praise. But I couldn't help but stare at Heather as she went about the room making notes in a little black book. When the final visitor departed, I flopped down on the simple sofa in the gallery sitting area, beginning my heals with a moan. So, Cassidy showed up holding 2 champagne glasses. I accepted the offered glass and responded, "Success, I think so." But Heather Adams was. 3 days later, after spending the entire night collecting notes, I sat in looking at my computer screen in shock at the news that Heather's review had just appeared in the Virginia. The words, "Renaissance Visionary," and "Bold Reinvention," sprang off the page of Beach Art Quarterly. The last sentence hailed my unreserved curatorial voice and proclaimed the Turner Gallery indispensable. My phone had been ringing non-stop since the review went out, and I was looking for serious collectors. I had been pursuing 2 artists, unexpectedly made time in their schedules for months, and even my landlord called to congratulate me and say he would be. The final call of the day came from a number I didn't recognize. Madison Turner. And it was about raising the rent at renewal. Responded that it was Heather's. Still feeling the high of the day's success, Madison. Voice that is simultaneously chilly and warm. I hope my assessment encapsulated the essence of what you're producing. I'm not sure. What else can I say except thank you? Please don't thank me. I just wrote the truth with a pause. Admittedly, I discovered that I wasn't simply fascinated in the work that made my heart stop. Suddenly, oh, your vision, your story, would you consider meeting again? After agreeing to meet her that weekend, I hung up and said, I'd like to profile you for a feature for Coffee. I felt it unnerved me how much I was feeling a strange flutter in my chest that I hadn't had in years. Especially not with Carl, anticipating meeting Heather Adams once more and realizing that it had nothing to do with the charity profile she had suggested. I looked at Heather across the tiny cafe table from where we had been talking about her feature article for Gala. I don't know why, but after over 2 hours, what had begun as a professional interview turned into something far more intimate. The woman who just sponsored her own gallery ads. Heather, those events aren't really my scene. Reopening. Heather's red hair caught the light as her blue eyes glistened with challenge. Our coffee was being annoyingly captivated by the halo effect created by the afternoon sunlight flowing through the window. The meeting had evolved into lunch. And inexplicably, it continued late into the afternoon. I found out that Heather had studied at the Sorbonne, composed poems that was never published, and had the contagious ability to talk about obscure art movements. I opposed because I know that world galas are different than passion gallery openings. Are merely wealthy individuals commending themselves. But this Heather leaned forward in support of the children's medical. Your presence would lend actual artistic legitimacy. Which is why I thought the Research Foundation small event was wonderful. Why me personally? My now cold coffee. Since you recognize true beauty. 1 week. I would love your presence because of the directness of her look. Which made something flutter in my chest. Later, I was wearing a midnight blue evening gown that I rarely wore because it had survived the divorce purge. The ballroom of the Virginia Beach oceanfront hotel glistened with chandeliers and the jewels of the city's wealthy. Beautiful Heather commented as she appeared next to me wearing an emerald outfit that accentuated her hair and highlighted her eyes. I felt like a phony after confessing to taking a champagne flute. According to a bystander, these individuals most likely have structures named after them. Heather smiled conspiratorially and put her palm up, saying, "Let me introduce you to a few who aren't terrible," gently on my lower back to help me navigate the rest of the evening as I observed Heather move through the crowd with the poise she was accustomed to. Conversations flowed naturally between art donations and subtly flattering remarks. Despite my misgivings, I ended up enjoying the evening. "Where did you disappear to?" I said as she returned to me after being away for 20 minutes, saying, "I'm just handling something," and then obliquely said, "Come with me, there's someone." Instead of introducing me to another possible donor, Heather took me to a peaceful terrace with a view of, "The person I want you to meet is the real me," she whispered very quietly, away from all this, the moonlight Atlantic, as she informed me about her younger sister's severe illness and her parents' early deaths. The seaside breeze tousled her hair. I was captivated by the woman's vulnerable side as I heard about her deaths and her own path in the art world. Was filled with keen observations and jagged edges. And I attend these events because they matter, she concluded, not because I like them. The event coordinator broke up our calm time, revealing the evening's donation total. The audience erupted in cheers as the astounding amount was disclosed. "That's wonderful," I murmured, truly touched by Heather's kindness. Grinning. "Enigmatic, it is." Later, as we were getting ready to depart, I heard 2 board members talking about an anonymous donation. I froze, recalling Heather, as one murmured, "No name just for Emma." That had put them beyond their $50 objective. "Ready to go?" she asked, citing the name of her sister. Emma. Heather showed up behind me and wrapped her shawl about herself. As we made our way to the valet, I whispered, "It was you." On the shoulders. Anonymous donation. She didn't say yes or no, but I could tell by the small flush on her cheeks that she did. Why anonymously? Most people would want recognition for that level of giving. We stood comfortably while Heather shrugged, saying that true kindness doesn't need applause. While we waited for her car in silence, something important had changed between us. The champagne I had drunk was giving me more courage than normal during the evening. And when we arrived at my apartment complex, I turned to her. "Would you care to join me for a nightcap on the spur of the moment?" Her smile was soft. "Would, but not tonight after we had had some alcohol." I felt ashamed of being so direct until she approached me. "Whatever this is between us, Madison, I want both of us to be clear-headed about it before I could." As I processed what she had spoken, she drew forward and briefly touched my lips. Something I might have imagined delicate, she muttered. It sent electricity through my entire body. "Good night, Madison." I stepped back and stood motionless. As I watched her push away my fingertips, I unintentionally touched my lips where hers had been at that very time on the pavement. I became aware that I was in substantial danger. The kind that was entirely unrelated to art galleries or reviews and had everything to do with the strange desire that has been blossoming in my chest for 3 weeks. Been avoiding Heather Adams. "You're being absurd," Cassidy said me during our favorite beachside restaurant for lunch. "What if she kissed you at the restaurant?" I almost choked on my water. But it wasn't I'm not sure what that was. But Jenna confirmed that it was a kiss while spearing a shrimp. With needless force. "And now you're hiding in your gallery behind the vapors they weren't incorrect when I turned down 2 of Heather's invites that evening. One to dinner, another to an art lecture. Mentioning gallery commitments her texts had becoming less frequent. In fact, I've even changed my morning coffee run to avoid the cafe where she frequently worked. I told Cassidy that I was hiding and that I was processing things differently and more quickly. Suggested since you seem so happy talking about her. But I wasn't prepared at the time to acknowledge that I had been replaying that scene outside my apartment every night since the gala. Feeling her soft push, I wasn't prepared to accept that nobody, not even Carl, had acknowledged our early conversation until I heard her breathe her breath against my skin. I recently been divorced, so I reminded them that days had ever made me feel so electrified from a simple touch and it's never too late for sex. You know, I've never raised an eyebrow with a woman. I snapped when I learned it wasn't about sex. But I quickly recognized my error. So, Cassidy triumphantly stated that the cosmos had even worse sentiments than a wicked sense of humor. And the following morning I safely sneaked into a coffee shop across town that I had never been to before. Heather Adams was seated near the window with her laptop open and a steaming mug next to it. Where I usually am. My initial reaction was to get away from her. But she looked up before I could get away. As I walked up to her table, she replied, eyes locked, no avoiding it now. Madison. Heartbreaking. This is unexpected. And I lied badly while I was just in the neighborhood, working on gallery items. She repeated out of the corner of her lips. Lifting sounds fascinating. But I noticed that there was an awkward pause between us. She appeared worn out, and the faint shadows under her eyes accentuated the blue. You've been busy, she finally said, stated without a doubt that the gallery is booming following your assessment. She said, her tone dropping a little. Should thank you again for that professional courtesy. I shifted uneasily, clutching my still empty coffee cup. Because the dismissal hurt more than it should have. I should let Madison, you return to work. Her voice interrupted me as I was about to depart. Are we going to discuss what I requested? Fully aware of what she meant when she said that you fled after I kissed you and looked anxiously at the tables next to me. But nobody was watching, so I didn't flee 3 times. Cancelled plans and suggested alternative coffee spots instead. So she shut down her laptop and sat there feeling as though I was. When called to the principal's office, Heather answered bluntly, I apologize. No, you didn't make me uncomfortable. I mean, you did, but not in the way you believe the words came out. I've never thought this about a lady before. But it's perplexing how her face relaxed and she reached across the table with her fingers lightly. And I confessed that it was frightening. I'm not requesting anything, Madison, but avoiding me isn't the solution. Her hand's warmth transmitted. I know I just need time to figure this out. Was the usual current that ran through me. Withdrawing her hand, she replied, take as much time as you need. But don't vanish. That night, I gave Jenna a call. And after 2 bottles of wine and hours of waiting, Cassidy called them to my flat for an urgent consultation. Cassidy gave her opinion after a roundabout discussion, saying that you're into her. The only question I have is if you have the will to investigate it. But what if it's simply post-divorce confusion? What if I'm just getting back together with the first person who truly showed interest? Then you'll spend time with her and don't hide from her. As Jenna pointed out logically. In addition, have you ever seen Carl gaze at you in the same manner as Heather? But in reality, I hadn't. Gazed at me periodically with hunger and possession. But never with the same level of attention Heather possessed. Was into my whole being. And later that night, when I was by myself in bed, I finally gave myself permission to envision. I had been ignoring the possibility of actually kissing Heather and feeling those hands that gesticulated so. As she described the sensation of art sliding across my flesh, I felt a surge of heat and sought for. Before I lose my nerves. I'm typing on my phone. Dinner tomorrow is my treat this time. No more running, she responded promptly. And Turner picked me up at 7 for the first time in weeks. I slept off while holding the phone. Instead of feeling resentful of Carl or worried about the gallery's finances. My dreams were, what the hell is Sunyam? I asked myself, surrounded by glimpses of blue eyes and red hair and opportunities I never realized I want. inquired, looking at Heather's phone screen over her shoulder as we sat on my couch with food containers strewn all over the place. If you could call museum visits, waterfront walks, and coffee table dates after 3 weeks of careful dating. After we had found a comfortable routine and were sharing long good-night kisses. Heather swiftly closed her screen. Nothing significant. You're nothing significant. I raised an eyebrow when you received 12,000 likes on social media. When you referred to Instagram as the demise of contemplative art consumption. She hesitated and became unusually agitated. Heather groaned and put down her wine glass, saying, "It's complicated. Try me." Over the course of the following hour, Heather disclosed that Emma, my sister, required specialized spinal surgery. Even though Heather was comfortable, the treatment, which was covered by insurance, cost almost $200. It was well beyond her means to live as a critic and sporadic curator. "So I made Sunyam," she stated, opening the. I looked through her phone's account, which was owned by a jewelry designer, wellness enthusiast, lifestyle influencer, and, shocked to see that the woman in these pictures was Heather, but totally changed her hairstyle, applied makeup, and wore bolder, more fashionable clothes instead of her typical emojis and motivational sayings that the real Heather would have used were strewn among the elegant neutral captions. "This is great," I confessed, truly pleased and frightened. "How did you build such a following so fast by researching what works and posting 8 times a day while interacting with accounts that are similar to mine?" Using the appropriate hashtags, she displayed a mixture of pride and humiliation. "The jewelry I produce sells surprisingly well. I've nearly increased it myself between those paid posts and affiliate links." I looked at her in awe as she made $120 in just 5 months. "You're a marketing whiz." Emma's discomfort is growing worse, so she fixed it out of desperation. "Surgery is planned for next month. But I still don't know why. I'm not particularly proud of the esteemed art critic. Didn't you tell me sooner?" Her eyes sank. I whispered, "You're moonlighting as a vivacious influencer selling crystal bracelets for someone you love. There's no need to feel guilty about it." Later that week, I was in Heather's apartment for the first time in a chic. We weren't there to see her collection, but it was a loft downtown with original artwork and wall-to-wall bookshelves. We were there to film, so she told us to apply a last coat of lip, hold the phone firmly, and try not to laugh. Shine a lot brighter than her typical delicate color, which I found fascinating. Before my eyes, Heather became into Sunyam, her motions became more intense, and her voice rose half an octave. She created an animated video to demonstrate the qualities of her healing crystal energy bracelets. Passion that almost veered into spiritual zeal. And she finally said her, "God, it was even more agonizing to watch your voice descend down to its usual register. You're amazing." Gave her the truth. "But I'm still amazed that people purchase that crystal energy nonsense." I hope Heather responded. I helped her package orders that evening, wrapping them delicately. So who am I to judge if it helps them? Removing her makeup. Despite her contempt for the metaphysical qualities of the crystal, I observed the beaded bracelets in tissue paper. Dustin sent me a private message saying, "I know you're not who you pretend to be. Sunyam, I've loved both of you. Coming to Virginia Beach the next week. We're meant to be together. And I'll show you how much I care." I stated that completely awake. "Since you're closing this down today, I'm still unable to hear Heather's voice. Emma's operation costs $12 short. Where will I get that money? We'll figure it out in a week. This isn't worth it. It's simple for you to claim your safety," she yelled, "but your sister isn't in pain." The dispute intensified, with words flying back and forth between us like daggers all the time. "You're becoming the character," I finally yelled as the strain of the previous weeks burst. "I don't even know who. Maybe you shouldn't be with either of us," she shot back, as we stood facing each other. "I'm with Heather or Sun anymore." Another breathing heavily in her bedroom's low light, and the pain in her eyes reflected mine. Something shattered between. "Maybe I shouldn't," I said to Heather rather than answering her. Abruptly approached me, her hands cradling my face with unexpected compassion. The contrast between her. Before I could comprehend what was occurring, our stern words and gentle touch quickly subdued my rage. Her lips were on mine, not in the cautious, hesitating manner we had previously shared, but with intense hunger. We collapsed back onto her bed months later. Her hands went under my shirt, her touch transforming weeks of stress and terror into something urgent and primordial. I reacted with equal fervor, trying to uncover the true Heather beyond the Sunyum facade, as it felt electric against my skin. After several hours, I traced designs on sheets and each other as the first rays of daylight came through the slats. "I'm sorry," Heather muttered over her bare shoulder. "I've been losing myself in this." "I understand," I said, drawing her nearer. "We'll work it out together." Nodded against my chest, but the anxiety was still visible in her face as she counted down to Dustin's and Emma's surgeries. "He's found me." Heather's voice quivered as she pressed her phone forward as the promised visit crept mercilessly forward. 3 days prior to Emma's operation, we were eating breakfast at my place when the screen message made my "I have proof that you're acting like someone you're not. Heather Adams, and I know your secret." I said, "You're fraud. Meet me today or I'll reveal you to the world." "It's Dustin." "I don't know," she mumbled, gripping my name, which felt like poison on my tongue. "How did he get your personal number?" An hour later, when I opened the gallery, I was afraid that her coffee mug may break because she was holding it so tightly. "But he knows everything." Another shocking email came from an unidentified account, and it was obvious Dustin had brought pictures of Heather at art events with arrows pointing to her face and screenshots of Sunyam's profile. The subject line, "Respected critic living double life as fake," included attributes that demonstrated they were the same individual. When I phoned Heather, she replied, "He sent this to the Art Quarterly." And I thought of several galleries. Raced through the ramifications. If this were to leak, critics would damage Heather's reputation. She would become a laughingstock in the art world if it were revealed that she was selling mystical crystal bracelets online. Globe, we must visit the police. I persisted in telling them what I made up a character to sell expensive jewelry, and her sour chuckle rang out over the phone. "I haven't. In a technical sense, any unlawful harassment is unlawful stalking. Illegal." Madison. Her voice grew softer, and she said, "There's no time before Emma has surgery. I told you strongly that I couldn't manage this on my own in 3 days." Heather. I vehemently objected to meeting this man alone that night. Consented to meet Dustin at a crowded downtown cafe, but I insisted on being at a close. He was younger than I had anticipated, with clean-cut eyes and a table ready to step in. Even from a distance, I could see the tension coiling in my gut as it burned with such intensity that it made me uneasy. After 20 agonizing minutes, Heather stood up as he sat across from her and started talking with enthusiastic gestures. I swiftly followed her as she left abruptly and found her leaning against a wall in the nearby alley facing Ashen. She stated bluntly that we are spiritually connected and that he wants me to be with him. Connected, and if I don't, he sends everything to all of the nation's art publications. That's my kind of blackmail. 3 days before Emma's operation, her career was in ruins. She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. And I couldn't allow that to happen. I silently called every gallery owner and art collector I knew that evening to request emergency loans by. I had promised over $8 this morning. But that wasn't enough, so I was getting ready to sell my automobile when Carl called me out of the blue. "Madison." He seemed shocked that I had answered. "I need to talk about the tax ramifications of our property partition." But 2 hours later, I had a request. I brought a $12 cashier's check into Heather's apartment. "How?" she said, gazing at the. I just said, "Now you can tell Dustin to go to hell." After checking that Carl owed me. She rushed forward, throwing her arms around me as tears streamed down her cheeks, saying, "Madison, I can't take this, you can." And I firmly stated that Emma needed surgery. So that afternoon we went together. We walked back to my car, Heather's, and deposited the last sum required for Emma's surgery at the bank. "Meeting tonight or I release everything. Tell him to do his best." Dustin texted me as my phone buzzed. Squeezing her palm, she said, "Emma's covered now." Panic struck instead of relief. "Madison, Heather is threatening my job and everything I've worked so hard to build." Heather and Dustin had their final meeting that evening over my objections. while I observed from a distance. Their conversation seemed intense before Heather abruptly got up and left. Dustin. All I had to do to see that I was between them was to take her arm. When she pushed his hand away from her for a few seconds, he remarked, "No, that's the end of it." Furious. "You don't comprehend our relationship. It doesn't exist." Heather stated unequivocally, "I made up this lie to cover my sister's medical expenses. And you're picking her." He looked at, "I'm choosing reality, Heather, over some gallery owner, over your actual course." As we were leaving, he shouted after us, "You'll regret this by tomorrow," and firmly responded, "Something you should try." Later that evening, while we were lying on my bed, Heather muttered, "I'm sorry I pulled you into this." "You didn't drag me anywhere," I said, drawing her nearer. "I choose to stay here even though my career ends tomorrow." "Even then," I said, softly kissing her forehead, "we'll work it out. Partners do that." The term sat between us, fresh and important. Partners, not friends, or any other informal designation we had been avoiding during the crisis. "Partners," she repeated gently as though testing the term. And clarity had appeared. I liked how her fingers entwined with mine. By noon the following day, when the bomb dropped, Dustin had emailed his exposé to. My phone kept ringing with gallery owners asking for confirmation from every art publication in Virginia Beach and beyond. Artists questioning whether Heather's earlier evaluations of their work were tainted. And worst of all, Carl Madison's voice exuded that recognizable condescension. "I recently learned about your friend the—" "What about her? Critic with the secret identity?" I gripped the phone more tightly, bracing myself. "You see, this reflects. They were in our little art community news, of course. And people are talking about you right now at the gallery," I said, astonished by my own certainty that Heather did what she did. "I don't care what people say. I traveled at light speed. I was concerned about you because of what she had to do for her sister." Carl's disapproving sigh, which cracked through the connection. "Managing the gallery by yourself. You're too sentimental and hasty to associate with ancient, divisive individuals." Madison may have hesitated or doubted herself. But the person I've grown into over the past few months. Adams knew better than to fall in love with Heather Adams. "Goodbye, Carl," I murmured, cutting off the phone. Heather was at the. I had agreed to visit them later. But first I was in the hospital with Emma, who had been admitted for pre-surgical preparations. Travis Miller, one of my greatest collectors, was waiting when I arrived at the gallery after dealing with the consequences. "I guess you've heard of Heather Adams." He nodded curtly outside Madison. "Due to the loss of a significant client, I have unlocked the door and stolen myself. I've cancelled my loan of the Garfield piece from her upcoming exhibition at the Pearson." And Travis followed me inside. "Gallery, I advise you to keep your distance as well." I cautiously put my suitcase down. "Travis, careful word choice. Do you know why Heather made that online character to market phony crystal healing bullshit to unsuspecting others?" His eyebrow. I maintained eye contact with him while she stretched to save her sister's life. "Emma requires spinal. When her insurance refused to pay for the $200 procedure, Heather took the only action she could." Consider Travis's slightly altered expression. "It's regrettable. Yet it doesn't alter the fact that she lied about herself." "No." I concurred. "But it does explain it. And since she went above and beyond, I won't be separating myself from someone I care about." Throughout the day, the story was repeated with modifications to assist the family. While some customers were sympathetic and even amazed by Heather's resourcefulness, others were contemptuous and implied that she would irreparably damage her integrity. And by closing time, I had lost two important revenues and acquired Cassidy, an unexpected defender who had arrived to assist with field calls. "You know what's crazy?" As we were locking her up, she remarked, "Half of these people criticizing her have false identities themselves. They just don't exist online. They purchase works as status symbols, act as though they understand art, and don't profess to be friends with artists they hardly know. Instead of expressing gratitude," I questioned, "when did you become so insightful?" I was thankful for her help when my best buddy fell in love. Love with a woman who fabricates online personas. She smiled. "Strange roll with it." I discovered Heather and Emma's room in the hospital that night. They were both looking at Heather's phone in disbelief when I asked them what had happened. Heather stated, "Holly, 3 magazines have pulled down the flowers I brought to the Pearson Gallery. Which canceled my exhibition, my commissioned articles, but my editor at Art Quarterly has decided to put my column on hold." Clutched her sister's hand in the hospital bed, saying, "You gave up everything for me," and I sat next to them and took Heather's other hand. "We'll figure it out," she said forcefully. "I'd do it again." This out. 2 nights later, I was at a private exhibition at the Turner Gallery, where I had requested everyone's help. Reached out to each artist who had ever conveyed appreciation for Heather's fair assessments. And the replies had been. As guests came, Heather discovered that an astonishing 17 artists had contributed items for a special exhibition called Authenticity. Stopped motionless close to the entrance, gazing incredulously at the packed gallery. "What is all this?" she murmured. "Your community," to which I just replied. "The real one." Artists performed all evening, approached Heather, with some offering encouragement and others debating the morality of her behavior. But everyone was interacting with respect. The discussions were sincere and occasionally awkward. What the art world said was important. As the evening wore on, I clinked a glass to get attention, and the gathering fell silent. Truth has always been at the center of art, sometimes in an awkward or contentious way. Heather Adams has. Her recent acts may appear paradoxical, but they sprang from the honesty and criticism that she built her career on. I gazed straight at Heather, the most sincere person I could ever hope to adore for her sister. Stood staring in the corner. Some people have the right to criticize her decisions. But we honor the complicated and muddy truth of being human in this gallery. And we support those who have supported us the most. The ensuing cheering wasn't universal, but it was sincere as the crowd scattered and Carl came up in front of me. He looked at Heather and said, "Quite the speech," with an unreadable face. "You've changed, Madison." "I have. Are you too?" he said, leaving the question open-ended. "Yes," I said. He nodded slowly without further explanation, saying, "Bold move in this neighborhood, the only move that matters." Heather found me with her eyes full of unshed tears after he went. And she said, "Thank you." As we stood together, facing whatever lay ahead, her fingers intertwined with mine. I'd never been more certain of the best choice of my life. "She's awake," Heather said in a whisper, her face beaming as we walked into Emma's hospital room too. 6 hours of intricate spinal surgery had gone well days after the procedure. Work that was supposed to put an end to years of terrible pain. And as Emma spotted me, her weary smile widened. "Madison, you arrived." Naturally, I placed a vase of sunflowers on her nightstand. Must ensure that this room doesn't appear gloomy because the art community's focus has been on it for the previous week. Eventually changed to more recent scandals. And I found that I had become closer to Emma. The same sardonic humor as Heather, but with a softness her elder sister occasionally lacked. "According to the doctors," Emma replied, squirming a little as she shifted positions, "I can begin physical therapy next week. And the pain is." Heather gripped her sister's hand and said, "It's already different, more like recovery pain than the endless kind I had before." Hand tears that threatened to be worth everything. Later, while Emma was sedated, Heather and I strolled. I got another email from Art Quarterly. She murmured softly in the hospital hallways, "They want me back, but with, including a 6-month probationary period. A public declaration. And what will you?" She chuckled quietly as she wrote the statement. Took the probation. And said, "What am I going to do?" I proposed a new idea that had been developing for weeks and was now boiling to the surface with me. "What are?" "You mentioned that we paused next to a huge window that overlooked Virginia Beach, and the October sunset illuminated the sky. Vivid purples and oranges. I've been considering growing the gallery. And I described how my heart is pounding when making a venue that honors authenticity above all else. Presents up-and-coming acts alongside well-established ones. And her blue eyes looked into me as a partner with complete equity. "And you want me to be involved?" I took her hands in mine and, with your critical eye and my business acumen, we could create something new. For the first time, Heather, the articulate critic, appeared stunned. 2 months later, The larger, the doors of Turner Gallery, today known as Turner and Adams Contemporary, opened. Our vision had changed into something neither of us could have produced on our own. And the change went beyond the tangible. A remarkable number of people attended the opening night. Some were interested in the scandalous partnership, while others, sincere interest in authenticity and artifice. Our debut exhibition, Emma is now taking cautious. Our unofficial greeter, a cane, proudly said, "Your ex-husband is here." As I went by, I nodded toward the doorway where Carl was standing uncomfortably. I invited him, and I acknowledged that it seemed appropriate. Somehow, after speaking politely but stiltedly with Carl, I discovered Heather is analyzing one of our highlighted pieces, a mixed media installation that explores the difference between digital and real. In a quiet spot, having second thoughts, I put my arm around her waist and inquired about Travis. The gallery never spoke to me about that horrible sculpture. I laughed as I felt the last remnants of my former existence finally come to rest as Miller continued to try to sell us completely. Placed next to the new Emma, who looks great tonight and is pain-free for the Heather's voice was heard for the first time in years. And Sunyam was formally retired. Over 50,000 people liked her last post. You miss her a bit, don't you? Considering these aspects of her, she was more liberated than I let myself be. Concerned about academic acceptance, maintain the jewelry-making abilities I recommended. Her eyebrow arched playfully, and those bracelets were really lovely. Perhaps part of a little collection for the gallery gift shop. Emma arrived as the evening wore on. As long as you don't say they cure anything other than fashion emergencies. Give us a small gift bag for you both, she replied, her eyes sparkling. Inside, there was a basic frame with 2 objects and a pressing. A screenshot of Sunyam's last post and a flower from the charity gala where Heather and I first connected. Later that evening, following visitors, a sunset with the phrase, "Some endings are just beautiful beginnings in disguise," had left and we had consumed a bottle of champagne in celebration in the deserted gallery. Heather dragged me to the dance with me, she said in the middle of the room, even though there was no music playing. Now, she drew me up close, where everyone can see, and I chuckled quietly. As tomorrow through those large windows, I thought of the frightened woman as we danced together under the gallery lights. I had recently gotten divorced a few months prior, and I was terrified of change and fleeing strange emotions that I never anticipated. This, I said, rubbing my face against her hair. The greatest works of art are never. They evolve as we create them, Heather said, her hands warm on my back, in response to our initial sketches. While we were dancing in our little moment of creation, Virginia Beach traffic continued outside our windows, life rushing by. Whatever criticism the art world received from ex-spouses in society appeared remote and unimportant in the. Together, we constructed these walls, which served as our gallery, truth, and ongoing work of art.